Welcome back. Well, you'll know the problems we've seen in teaching our children to read. The findings of that survey that found that around 80% of our children in grade 4 cannot read for meaning. The National Reading Collaboration Trust, looking at the manifestos of political parties as regards to reading. It's the CEO of the National Reading Collaboration Trust is Dr. Godwin Khosa. Dr. Khosa, good afternoon, and thank you for your time. You've been holding a big conference about this. What are political parties actually saying about our problems around our children and reading?
Yes, Stephen, thank you. So we talk about reading a lot, but it's the National Education Collaboration Trust. So today we actually fired the first salvo at, I must say, our political parties, all of them. It's election season again. We're going to get a lot of promises from, political parties. So what we did in the education space, we reviewed the manifestos of the past 15, 20 years to see what has been offered and what are the similarities and differences between political parties. And we sought to identify the gaps and suggest what should be in comprehensive manifestos. So we had a very good initial discussion, and we are expected to have about 10 such dialogues during this election period.
Do you believe political parties really understand the issue? I mean, it is such a deep-seated issue. Do you believe that political parties understand it?
So, to be fair to them, Stephen, it's not their primary business and only business to understand, education and reading. But we as the education community are saying they need to do a little bit more, homework before they meet our promises on what they will deliver in order to get the votes of the public. I mean, we have identified quite a number of gaps in the manifestos of the body political parties in this country. Much of them come unsubstantiated. They're just open statements. They're not clear choices that are being presented. There's limited evidence. There's limited consideration of implementation practicalities. And basically, we're saying, please go and do your homework. And when you come and canvass and present education manifestos, they must actually be based on evidence. And we've outlined a number of areas that they may want to make pronouncements on, because those areas would actually bring about sustainable change in education.
One of the issues around this is it would seem to me, and I'm no expert on this, you're the expert, Dr. Khosa, but it would seem to me that you need one long-term policy that's implemented for an entire generation. In other words, it must go for 10, 20 years. Political parties, I'm afraid to say in my experience, maybe don't have the concentration span. They just focus on the next election. Is that a problem?
So I think you're correct, Stephen. But the other side of the coin is that if the public, if the education experts don't hold the political parties accountable for what they say this time around and the next time around, then you don't see consistent promises. We have seen a break of promises between political cycles, some of them coming back and so on. We've highlighted those to them today. So if we say maths and science are important, they've got to be important throughout until actually we have achieved the targets that we're setting. If we're saying reading is important, we want to see it in every manifesto. And in fact, we want to see how actually they promise to bring about changes in reading. One of the areas where it's weak, and I think we are actually shortchanged as the public and the education experts, is oftentimes political parties give us promises that don't cohere. So oftentimes you see it does not actually link to their change philosophy or their ideology and so on. So we're saying, when you say you're going to change education, tell us how that will sit in your own ideological and philosophical approach, outlooks. And there's certain areas that are important, which we want to see pronouncement on. How will we deal with the future of education? How will they accommodate technology? How are they going to deal with COVID-19 learning losses? What are we going to deal? How are we going to deal with resourcing in the context where the public purse has contracted? So honestly, this morning actually we sent out a message to the political parties that we need them to do proper homework, and when they make promises, they must back that up with evidence. And would very much like to see their policy papers behind their half-a-page manifestos and so
Dr. Khosa, it seems to me, and you know, you and I have had this conversation before, we need a sort of huge national focus on reading. And politicians are not the only leaders in society, but I think we can probably accept that they are fairly important. We need a kind of, you know, ongoing festival of reading. We need, you know, everyone to almost on a daily basis say, this is what I'm reading at the moment. And I don't mean, you know, which novel they're necessarily reading. I mean, whatever it is. You know, I just don't see any kind of national effort to that. We can't just leave it to the basic education department. It needs to be a national effort. And I worry sometimes, if I may, you know, you do incredible work here, but I don't see other people in society doing maybe the work we need them to do.
Well, you're correct, but we were actually given counsel today by by academics and experts in this case, and referring at policy in general. I mean, the one key point that has come across is that when we talk about policy, whether around reading or language, we've got to first ensure that it's in text and it makes sense. Secondly, it must actually meet out a very clear discourse. It won't help to suggest this today, that tomorrow, and so on. And thirdly, it must actually be demonstrated in practice. So text, discourse, and practice. So in the case of reading, for instance, the discourse that's emerging is that actually, you know, you have to deal with the issues of how you approach the language teaching and the key tenets to improving language rather than dealing with reading on its own. So dealing with reading on its own without actually dealing with the discourse aspects of reading which are sitting in language actually makes for a less than sustainable way of improving, you know, reading. So reading, for instance, has to be tackled at these three levels. What does the text say? What is the discourse? And what are the practices? What are we getting the communities to do? I do agree with you that communities must actually bring their pound of flesh in the improvement of reading. The same applies to mathematics. The same applies to sciences. That's how we actually have to deal with these education challenges. So as the political parties come and give us promises, they must have actually thought of this at the three levels that I've shared with you.
Dr. Godwin Khosa, thank you. CEO of the National Reading Collaboration Trust. Really appreciate the time.